Hello, everyone. This is Pendy.
And this is Paul, otherwise known as EastX Twitch the Great.
And this is Jen, aka Dragon Quest Feels.
Oh, man, I was playing Dragon Quest 11 again the other day, and those Puff Puff references were hilarious.
Puff Puff? What's that? A pastry?
It's been way too long since I've recorded my adventure in the Imperial Scrolls of Honor. I can't reset my way out of this question, can I? Pendy, I'm tagging you in.
You know, it's when you go up to someone who has and then you...
Oh, my Lanta. Next thing you'll tell me there are coffins instead of ghosts when party members die.
Paul, just wondering, have you only played the original Dragon Warrior games for the NES?
In reality, no. In Pendy's elaborate fantasies, yes.
By the goddess, that's it. You've only seen the censored versions of the Dragon Quest series. Well, thank goodness we have two guests today who have taken a lot of the Dragon Warrior games and turned them into uncensored and retranslated Dragon Quest games. They've even done the same treatment for The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past.
Yes, let's welcome Jeff and Sparrow to the show.
Hello, everyone. This is Jeff, a.k.a. Chicken Knife. Pleasure to meet everyone.
Hi, everyone. This is Sparrow, also known as Nejimaki Pio online. Really happy to be here.
As with any new guest, we'll get to know them better through their Dragon Quest roots. I'll start us off by asking you both these questions. How did you get into the Dragon Quest series? We'll start with Jeff.
Dragon Warrior for the NES. I played it shortly after Final Fantasy, which is a bit of a sin. It was originally borrowed from a friend.
I rented Dragon Warrior Monsters from Blockbuster back in the day. I was looking for something that was like Pokemon but not, and I absolutely fell in love and started playing other games from there.
Blockbuster, what's that? I was the same way. I had a bunch of rental stores back in the day where I got to rent some of these games as well.
And that was a good choice of rental. So, guesties, what's your favorite mainline Dragon Quest game?
Mine is Dragon Quest 11, specifically the 3DS version.
Mine is Dragon Quest V, specifically the Super Famicom version, which some people think isn't beautiful, but I think it's the most beautiful Dragon Quest game.
I also think it's beautiful.
These are both some deep cuts with the versions you guys chose there, so I'm expecting very big things from you for this question. What is your favorite Dragon Quest spin-off game?
Well, I happen to not have played very many of them. I've tried to play a bunch. I think I've played about half an hour of every single one, but the only one that I really got into and really loved was Dragon Quest Monsters.
It would be Dragon Quest Monsters for the Game Boy Color for me as well. Like I said, I fell in love with it when I rented it. Became one of my favorite video games of all time. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that game later too.
And going back to your choice of Dragon Quest 11 for the 3DS, I'm so jealous that you've gotten to play that. I was so disappointed when they didn't bring that over as well, along with the PS4 version. So that's good on you, because that has a unique style to it, which I really love.
Mm-hmm.
I was also originally disappointed that they didn't bring it over because that was the version I wanted to play from the very beginning. But I've made peace with that.
No, I understand. And speaking of the Dragon Quest Monsters series, what's your favorite Dragon Quest monster?
Would absolutely have to be Rainhawk, also known as Prism Peacock in the modern translations. I just think rainbow bird demons are really cool.
Nice choice.
So hard to pick for me. There's a lot of great monster designs, but I love the Great Dragon primarily because he's just so good. And, he's at the end of Dragon Quest V and, he replaces your Panther. So I always love him.
He is pretty great. So what's your favorite Dragon Quest character?
There's only one Dragon Quest. Well, no. Let me say two. There's probably two Dragon Quest characters that make me just tear up completely when I play their games. One of them is Yangus from Dragon Quest 11. Sancho would probably be the other one from Dragon Quest 5.
For me, it absolutely has to be Terry from Dragon Quest 6 and Dragon Quest Monsters. I can relate to him a lot with his moody antisocialness and love for monsters.
I love that. All right, let's go into game mechanics, things like casinos, job classes, monster collecting, all that good stuff. What's your favorite one in the series?
For me, it would have to be critical hits. I find them immensely satisfying, and I really like when jobs like the martial artist, for instance, have an increased critical hit rate. It really draws me toward that job in games that have different classes that you can choose.
So what did you think of Dragon Quest IX, where it brought in basically critical hits for spells, like when they go crazy or something like that? I forget what the exact term for it is.
I absolutely loved that. I had never played a game where spells could have critical hits before, so the first time I saw that in Dragon Quest IX, I was like, holy cow, this is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, I love that too. What about you, Jeff?
I liked a lot of the bells and whistle mechanics throughout the series, but my favorite thing about the series, besides how good the writing is the simple attack and defense formula for combat, which has pretty much stayed the same as far as I understand from the very beginning. In Dragon Quest, your attack damage is right around half of your attack rating, and your defensive, like the number of hit points that gets blocked from every incoming attack, is approximately 1/4 of your defense rate. And I just think that's the most elegant, simple, but effective system. It keeps kind of everything in line, and it's just much better than other competing RPGs like Final Fantasy, where your full defense reduces the hit points from every incoming hit, and defense is completely overpowered. Like Dragon Quest did it perfectly.
Very nice. So along with Jen and myself, Jeff is one of the admins of the Dragon Questers Facebook group. When Jeff first mentioned he was heading up these projects, I got very excited for them. Now that I've played several of the Dragon Quest Delocalized mods, I highly recommend them. What exactly is Dragon Quest Delocalized, and what is your role in these projects? Jeff, will go with you first.
All right. Well, these really started with me. Sparrow jumped in shortly afterwards. But the way they began was when Dragon Quest XI first came out. I got the English version, and then one of my longtime friends, who is a native Japanese person, got the Japanese version, Dragon Quest XI, at the same time. And we were playing it together for endless hours, and we were on the phone exchanging notes about everything that we were experiencing. Names of the abilities, names of the monsters, names of the characters, names of the spells. And he kept feeling more and more frustrated and amazed that our version was so different. And I assumed it was relatively close, but he made it clear to me that the contemporary translations of Dragon Quest games kind of turn everything into a pun or a joke and give the games a very silly atmosphere. Now, a lot of people love that, and there's nothing wrong with that, but he gave me some insight into kind of the Japanese style and the more somber, serious tone of the Japanese game, even though there are jokes and puns present as well. And he gave me the idea, you know what, I'd like to go back and see if I could reshape the early Dragon Quest games into something that accurately, or at least to the best of my ability, reflected the Japanese style. So initially I worked with him, but the guy's very busy. He's a doctor, he's a family man, and he didn't have the ability to go through and translate everything from scratch. So I was relying on various internet sources for translation, the quality of which was kind of questionable. I would bring him questions, and he would always answer my questions, but he wouldn't do a one-to-one translation of the game. So, the original version that I believe came out did not have Sparrow's involvement, but Sparrow got involved shortly afterwards. As far as what I do for the projects, I did a lot of art where I kind of retooled title screen. I redid character art for Dragon Quest I so that the characters looked like the original Japanese characters. I did hacking. I kind of learned hacking little by little as a result of working on this and getting help from the romhacking.net community. And, I kind of did the writing that we see in the final versions. And when Sparrow got involved, I really worked collaboratively with Sparrow in terms of the finished product from a writing standpoint. And most of all, I argue with Sparrow. That's my main contribution.
I wanted to back up 1 second, Jeff. Something you said kind of hit close to home for me. When you were talking about the translation differences and the punniness of the current iteration of translations, I have to ask you if you feel like Dragon Warrior 7 for the PlayStation hit the sweet spot of the tone of the game, or if you think it still needs more direction to go that way.
That's a great question. I don't know if I have played that since working on these projects because I'm a lot more in tune with it now that we've done all this work.
Sure.
And I was actually thinking about going through 7. I just went through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Probably going to jump into 6. Probably going to jump into 7 afterwards. So I might have to circle back with you on that. But I'll say this: the first couple games had a strong, medieval style, which was foreign to the Japanese. 3 kept a bit of that, but 3 started getting a lot closer, and I think 4 got a lot closer too to the Japanese style. And from what I remember of 7, I think it kind of fell in line that same way. But but there were things that were kind of missing, like the name Gabo. It failed to replicate the kind of dog reference that the Japanese version had in the name. So there's things that the remake probably did right that were left off the original, but then the remake probably went a little wild with the humor and the puns as well.
Very interesting. Thank you. And Sparrow, I have to ask you what your role is in this project, how you came on board, and if you're arguing with Jeff as much as he claims to be arguing with you.
Yes, to the last part, arguing is a key part of the process. The work we do would not be what it is without all of that arguing. So yes, that's extremely important. My primary role in all of this is translating from Japanese to English. So when he said his Japanese friend doesn't translate the game 1-to-1, I go in and do that. I'll generally play it in Japanese and I'll write down whatever lines I need to write down. He also said that a version of these works existed before my involvement. When I jumped in, we kind of overhauled all of the text a bit. He was going on, like he said, online resources, a bit of intuition. He's really good at figuring out when lines are censored. I'm really good at figuring out when lines are saying something else in Japanese, but not in a censorship kind of way. So by playing the game sometimes in Japanese and English simultaneously, I hone in on things that need to be changed. The main reason why this was of interest to me, there were a few years in the 3DS era of gaming when we were just not getting Dragon Quest games localized at all. A lot of the Dragon Quest monster spin-offs, like Joker 2 Professional, Joker 3, the remakes of the Game Boy Color Dragon Quest monster games didn't come over. Obviously, Dragon Quest 11, which I mentioned earlier. So if I wanted to play those games, and I did, my only option was to play them in Japanese. So I taught myself all the spell systems, all the abilities, all the monsters and characters and everything in Japanese. And that kind of took over. It became my preference as opposed to playing in English. So learning about this project and the chance to get involved with it, I found it pretty cool. So I had originally just been posting on the Facebook group. There was an unrelated post, not by Jeff. It happened to have some Japanese text in it. I made a comment. I translated the text in the post. And then he asked me out of nowhere, can he message me with questions about Japanese lines? I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I got nothing to do. And then from there, we just started talking and I first played the hacks and then I got involved with the hacks.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, you're completely right when it came to that 3DS era, because we also missed like Theater Rhythm, Slime Mori Mori 3, all sorts of games during that time. And, some people may ask, why not just hack the originals and put in a newly translated script? Why go to the trouble of hacking the Dragon Warrior games and restoring all of that censored sprite work? Jeff, I'll let you handle this one.
So that's a very, very valid question. And people have taken different approaches. There's pros and cons of which base you want to start with. If you're going to start with the base of the Japanese game, the problem is that you're going to have menus and text windows and spaces for namings that are designed specifically for Japanese kana. And Japanese kana is a much more dense script in text form than English is. So where the English version might allow 8 characters for a character name, the Japanese in the original Dragon Quest only allowed 4. That means you have to retool those menus or you're stuck with those original limitations, which is a little unpleasant. There was a version of Dragon Quest 1 based on the Japanese version by a hacker going by Poly Hallinan, and he did a straight translation that maintained all of those kind of aspects and spacing restrictions from the Japanese version. So that's out there. In my case, I thought that the English versions brought a lot of good things to the table. The Japanese versions required you to write down a password. The English versions had battery backup saving, as of Dragon Warrior 1. And, they allowed your character to kind of change directions and, move, up, down, left, right, and face whichever direction he was moving. And I thought that was great. So I wanted to use the US release or the North American release of the game, but strip away some of the changes that I felt were not necessary. I wanted the player to have a sense of progression of the series. So, for instance, the first Dragon Warrior game added graphics from Dragon Warrior 2 reflecting coastline. I took that away because I think it's kind of cool to go from not having to having. Also, you may notice that the character designs of Dragon Warrior 1, they're very similar to the character designs in Dragon Quest 4 because it came out approximately the same time that they were working on Dragon Quest 4 in Japan. So once you go to Dragon Quest 2, the designs are totally different. So I liked kind of reverting all the NPC sprites to the original graphics in Dragon Quest 1 so that you would get a sense of progression when you go to Dragon Quest 2, where everything felt like an incremental improvement with each new version of the series. So yeah, to really answer the question, I thought it would be easier to revert the censorship graphically in the US versions than it would be to re-implement all of those improvements in the Japanese version.
Yeah, that makes sense because I don't know how that'd be kind of a tough undertaking, I would think, to revert the original Dragon Quest games from a password system to a battery backup type system that they implemented in the Warrior games, for instance.
Yeah, they did impressive work. So when it came to swapping most of the censored sprites for the uncensored ones, it generally wasn't hard. You just pulled up these sprites in graphics editors that you can pull up the ROM data, and you can just kind of copy and paste the Japanese right into the English. But there are some issues that came up with mirror. For instance, in Dragon Quest 2 and 3, one of my hardest tasks was getting rid of those little ghosts and replacing them with coffins because the ghosts used mirrored sprites. They took the same tiles and they just kind of used a mirroring technique. Whether you were facing left or right, they would kind of flip the data. So I had to figure out how do I undo that mirroring in order to apply the coffin sprites and not have them get mangled when you move around. But, I might be getting a little bit technical.
We don't mind a bit of technical talk. In fact, I have it on good authority that Pendy finds the killing machine monster very attractive. So, Jeff, what have been your biggest challenges in hacking these games?
For Dragon Quest 1 and 2, and initially working on Dragon Quest 3, I was kind of riding a bike with training wheels. I had this guy named ABW who had a really critical role for us in terms of hacking support. He was constantly interacting with me on the forums and in private messages on romhacking.net, and these projects never would have gotten to a respectable level of execution without his constant involvement. The biggest challenge for me happened during the process of working on our Dragon Quest 3 project. Something happened in ABW in terms of his life, and we were very deep in the project, still had a lot of technical hurdles to overcome, and he suddenly could no longer help out. And that was really, really tough. I was like, wait, hold on, I have no one to ask for help, because he would really kind of walk me through, okay, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, every time I faced a technical hacking problem. The problems that I had left to figure out were things like uncensoring background screens that were altered. And then there were some bugs. I get really, really crazy about bugs. Once I know that a bug is there, I have to have it fixed. And there were bugs in the original Dragon Warrior 3, like your wizards and sages would learn ice spells out of order. And there was another bug where if you parried with your fourth character, all four characters in your party would get the benefit of parry defense. There was some sprite bug issues with the fighter/martial artist class, and I needed to have those fixed. And in order to fix those bugs, no one was willing to kind of walk me through the process like ABW did, and I had to start studying 4506T machine code assembly language for the NES so that I could read the routines and figure out what was going wrong in those routines or what needed to change in order to fix those issues. So that was the hardest period for me and all of this time. I don't really consider myself a gifted technical person or a gifted hacker. I'm really just a moderate level hacker at best. But I had to really put in weeks and weeks and weeks of study and work in order to get to a level where I could solve those problems. And, you know, there's probably people who could have solved them in like 2 hours, but it took me months.
That's some hardcore effort there.
Yeah, you basically had to learn this from scratch, right?
At that point, yeah, I didn't really have the right support system. And yeah, I had to just learn it from the ground up. And I kind of wish I would have kept working with that and dealing with that. But my head hurt so bad and I felt so fatigued and exhausted. I just didn't want to deal with hacking for a while after that. And our next project, I think Sparrow kind of took over on the hacking front because I was so exhausted. And sadly, I forgot everything that I learned at this point. But maybe if I need to learn it again, it'd be a little cool.
No, that's pretty impressive nonetheless. Now, Sparrow also put in some hardcore effort when it came to translation. What have been your biggest challenges when it comes to translating these Japanese scripts?
So not a huge challenge like Jeff's, but my own biggest challenge is realizing my own personal limitations with language. I'm a very literal-minded person. Even in English, which is my native language, I don't always pick up on nuances that most people understand intuitively. In Japanese, my level of picking up on nuances is slightly worse. Not entirely. I do have some level of understanding of nuances in both languages, but not enough to successfully translate to a high quality on my own. So with Japanese, I often have to fall back on the Japanese friend that Jeff mentioned earlier. If there's a line that I'm confused about, like I'll understand what the words are, but it doesn't make sense in context, I'll have to message him and ask like, hey, is this an expression? What does this mean? And it's like 95% of the time an expression. With English, I'm constantly telling Jeff, arguing back with him if something doesn't make sense, and he'll usually argue back with me like, it does make sense, you're just thinking about it too literally. So yeah, that would be my biggest challenge with translating, but it's fun to think about. It's fun to work through that and overcome and learn and grow.
That's really interesting, and that's something you really think about is just how much depth there is to these scripts. So that's very interesting, Sparrow, how sometimes you might not pick up on something your first playthrough, you might miss those things. So it's almost like little Easter eggs to come back to. So looking forward to actually replaying the Delocalized and seeing some of those come to life. On a more serious and somber tone, I'd like to pour out a juice for romhacking.net, which has been the biggest community hub for ROM hackers. Just, like yourselves, it's recently closed down, though. What does that mean for your projects? You've mentioned getting a lot of support from the team over there and all the different community over there. Jeff, I'd like you to start.
Yeah, when I saw that news, it felt like a knife right through my heart. That place has meant so much to me. I honestly spend way more time playing hacks than playing released games. I've been just stalking that site, stalking those forums for how many years now? At least like 15 years. And, I interact there. It's a community. I've made friends there. And I really don't think any of these delocalized projects would exist if it wasn't for that site and that community. I was inspired by those people. I was doing testing for people before I started doing my own hacks. And, I just kind of being involved showed me, wait, maybe I could do this. And then other people who were there were like, yeah, we'll help. No problem. And that community aspect is so important. Like it's a great feeling when you have this dream to bring something to life that there's going to be people present to help you along your way. And without the community, I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. I really don't. It's depressing.
Yeah, on that note, I entirely agree. I haven't been quite as involved in the community as Jeff has, but I was involved for a while. It was a great place for support, a great place for learning. A lot of people in that community helped me. Like he said earlier, I took over the main hacking with the Dragon Quest Monsters project. I didn't really know a whole lot, and a lot of people just actually did things for me because they were aware that it needed needed to be done. So I definitely appreciated that. And I worry now that we won't be able to continue working on these delocalized projects to the same degree without access to the support we had on RHDN. It's definitely going to be a huge hurdle for both of us. We will probably have to study hacking a lot and really commit to that if we want to see any more projects through.
That's too bad. And I was disappointed by the romhacking.net closure as well. Looking back, of all the projects you've done so far, what has been your favorite to work on and why?
For me, Dragon Quest Monsters Delocalized. Like I just said, it was where I took my first baby steps into the actual hacking aspect of this hobby. It was fun. It was very frustrating at first. I felt like I was beating my head off a wall, but every single time I would have even the small taste of success with what I was doing, I was like, wow, this is really fun and something that I'm going to want to keep doing. Another aspect of why that one was my favorite, the original translation, like I have a lot of nostalgia for that game. That was my game. I've played it at least once a year since it came out. But when I go back to it these days, after having played it in Japanese years ago, I couldn't deal with the English translation anymore. It was very low quality. There were issues with jokes being translated too literally, so that all the humor was stripped from the game. Kind of the opposite problem that the modern translations have. There were also like issues with hints in the game being translated improperly, so it makes puzzles harder to solve. And of course, censorship. There were also typos. So now that we've retranslated that, now that we've delocalized that, it's nice to finally be able to play my favorite game again in English without getting annoyed about it.
So for me, I'd probably say Dragon Quest III Delocalized is what I'm most proud of because of, that heavy lift with working through the assembly hacking that I had to do on my own. I also have the most PTSD from that project, so it's kind of love and hate. But from a writing standpoint, I think that our scripts for Dragon Quest Monsters and and Zelda 3, Link to the Past / Triforce of the Gods, represented the very best of our writing work. I think as Sparrow and I worked together and also got feedback. There's a lot of times where people on ROM hacking would chime in and note to me, okay, this grammar wasn't perfect, or this could have been written better, or this is a problem. And some people might get offended by that, and I would sometimes feel a little hurt, but I would look at it and be open to feedback. And I think we kept getting better. We kept kind of pushing ourselves to produce better writing and better translation quality. And yeah, I think Zelda 3 and Dragon Quest Monsters represent the peak of our skill set in that regard.
Very nice. Now, when it comes to hacking choices, what were some of your hardest choices and what made you decide how to move forward? I remember you and I in particular had some wonderful conversations about Dragon Quest 3 and restoring Dharma temples, Buddhist swastika.
Yeah, that was really tough for me. When I got to the point where I knew how to port in the tile map from the Japanese game and implement that symbol, which would appear to a lot of uneducated people to be a Nazi swastika. I was kind of freaking out. I was like, am I going to get canceled for this? I didn't know how that was going to go over, and I was very worried about it. So, Pendy and I had a long conversation, and Pendy, he gave me a real sense of assurance that, the community would understand and respect what we're doing here, that, Asian culture would be understood. And I really don't have to worry that much about what, the population as a whole might think or how they might feel, when really it's just a narrow subset of people who are into retranslation projects and hacks. And for the most part, anybody playing this would care and understand about Asian culture. So, I implemented that and I never got a complaint about it, which was great. There were other things that I did get complaints about. Like at one point in an earlier version of our Dragon Quest I translation, the yellow colored third version of the wizard / sorcerer character, we had him named Grand Wizard. And someone pointed out to me, actually in an article published online, that, why are they putting KKK references into Dragon Quest? Quest. And that just went over our head. We had, there's a lot of these wizard type characters between the first few Dragon Quest games, and we had this, mapped out naming scheme where we tried to replicate the Japanese as much as possible. And it just came out Grand Wizard, and we didn't think about it. But, we made we took a second look, and we kind of found a way to still stay super faithful, but not make that KKK reference. So, thank God for our ability to do revisions. There was other monster names that we thought were right, but they just were not. There's the blue colored dragon in Dragon Quest 1 that has stumped many translators. People have called him Keith Dragon or Kith Dragon. My Japanese friend just suggested the word Keith, and I was like, I can't have a dragon named Keith. It just doesn't sound right at all in English.
Were you bullied by a child named Keith in school?
Yeah, because I think that dragon in Dragon Quest 1, you run into him into the bowels of the final castle, and that'd be funny to just, you're fighting all these tough enemies, and then it's like, hey, it's Keith the dragon.
It's Keith.
Yeah, that's what our friend Masa told us we should do, and so we originally had it just Kith, which is sort of a non-translation, but someone kind of clued us in that there was a connection to. The Keith was chosen as a Gaelic word for forest, and it really meant forest dragon. But like Hori was a very, very worldly guy. Like, he understood so much out there. He watched so many movies. He read so many books. He knew so much about culture. Like, the stuff that he pulled in was amazing. So for him to kind of use that exotic word for forest, we're like, all right, you know what? Let's use an exotic word that people might understand a little bit. So we use Sylvestrian, which is a Latin word for forest, and we were able to update that monster name to Sylvestrian dragon. So thank God for our ability to do updates, because I think all the old school translators like Nob, Sparrow's friend, who did some of the original ones, they would love to go back and fix this stuff, but they can't. But we can. It's a great thing.
I love that you can revise it, because I do think that it makes a game live a little bit longer. When somebody does work, puts it out, and walks away, they kind of don't care anymore about it, but you've kind of been able to evolve it. So that's really cool to hear how you were able to get that name right after, some extensive research.
Thank you. And we published 17 versions so far. So
that's impressive. It's impressive. And as at least my co-hosts know, I am a huge fan of anime and JRPGs in general. So I know that in general, translation choices are difficult to make. When thinking more on that, what were some of your biggest disagreements about translating the game, and how did you figure out the best path forward? Sparrow, I want you to start this one off, please.
Okay, so like I touched on before, our disagreements or full-blown arguments always come down to literal versus connotative meaning. So to kind of pull a specific example out of thin air, an example that has been still weighing on my mind for years. Jeff can't see me, but I'm glaring daggers at my phone. At one point, he wanted to write a line containing the phrase "completely escaped." I believe it was a character who was in jail, and the guard was saying, "This guy completely escaped." But like, you don't halfway escape, you don't partially escape. You have either escaped or you haven't. So I've been giving him crap for that line, and when we were working on this game, I was giving him crap on that line for days, maybe a week. I ultimately conceded defeat. The way to move past disagreements is to compromise. We were also around the same time arguing about what to call one of the weapons. I wanted to call it Sacred Knife. He wanted to call it Holy Knife. I eventually won the knife argument in favor of giving up on completely escaped. I can live with it. Not necessarily happy about it, but I can live with it.
Don't take a sacred knife to a completely escaped fight. Got it. Jeff, how about you?
We would kind of keep an inventory of the things that offend us, and we would make trades like that. We did that on numerous occasions. But yeah, in general, as we talked about earlier, Sparrow's very literal. I like really idiomatic, fun language that breaks the rules a little bit. For me, it's all about what sounds natural, and I'm not as good with like the strict rules and mechanics of English. I had to get a lot better at that in the course of doing these projects. So, a lot of times when I would throw out something like completely escape, I'd be like, Sparrow, trust me, like people say that. That's a thing, that's a phrase. And Sparrow would be like, nope, it's garbage. Nope, it's not going to be in the script. And I would have to find sources that demonstrate that language. And then Sparrow would be like, oh no, that's just some internet article. You can't trust it. And I'm like, okay, so let me find scientific periodicals that have this phrase. Let me find like works of literature that have this phrase. Eventually, I would win a lot of these fights, but there were some times where I just came to the conclusion that, you know what, that's not really considered good writing, and maybe I shouldn't use that phrase. But there are characters in these games that, are maybe a little less eloquent or a little less intelligent, and maybe the Yengises of the world would say some phrases that aren't proper English. So, there's times where I would argue that case and win. In the end, I'm glad that I'm the one who controls the insert script for these games, because I have a feeling that there would be a lot of little changes without my knowledge if I wasn't the one. So.
Yeah, at one point, didn't we give me the official title of like evil translation overlord or something like that?
Yeah, that rings a bell. And one thing I'll just end with is I think that our fighting would almost always result in better results. There were many times where I'd be fighting for one approach, Sparrow would be fighting for another approach. We would spend like a night in gridlock over it, and then the next day I'd just wake up with a new idea that seemed 10 times better than what we started with, and Sparrow would feel exactly the same way. So, I think our bickering would have very, very good results most of the time.
Yeah, debate can lead to positive outcomes. And I'm glad you guys have never come to blows. Pendy and I are always hitting each other. I usually win, but that's not important.
Hitting on each other.
Oh, he wishes. Aw, man, that hurt.
Now then, Jeff, you've also worked on improvement patches for Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 5. What did those entail?
All right, so the reason I have patches for those games along with these early Dragon Quest games is I played them a lot. I played them, 30, 40, 50 times. And when you're like me and you've worked on game hacks and you played a lot of game hacks, you start to like laser focus on every little thing that's wrong with the game where nobody else in their right mind will notice this stuff. So in Final Fantasy 1 and in Final Fantasy 5, I started noticing that your characters in battle, when they do things, have little errors in their pixel graphs. Like, for instance, the character Bartz in Final Fantasy V, when he raises up his hand in his bear job, which means no class selected, there's a random blue pixel that appears in his brown hair. It makes no sense. And it's the only frame out of his like 100-some frames between all of his classes where a blue pixel appears in his hair. So that set me off. And then I just started noticing more and more problems like that. So I published hacks for Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy 1 that make hundreds of changes to the character sprites in battle and fix those things. Far more in 5 because there's just so many sets of frames based on all the classes for each character. And then for FF1, I also, I'm a big fan of a hack called Final Fantasy Restored by Astral Esper. I would say that improvement and retranslation hack is what inspired me to get into this from the beginning. I thought it just improved the game so much. But there was a couple things mechanically that I felt that were still awry. Like the Thief was still a super weak class compared to the Red Mage and other characters. The Monk just became ridiculously powerful where he could like one-shot the final boss at a high level. So I also implemented some changes to kind of balance out those two characters. I fixed a problem where Death Machine was appearing far more than it should appear in the fourth elemental dungeon in the game. So yeah, those were my other main hacks. I've done some other like little things, but those have been incorporated in a lot of other projects that people have done since. So I'm glad I got them out.
Nice. Now, getting back into the aspect of language, Sparrow, how did you get into learning Japanese? What inspired you to learn the language, and how difficult was it?
So it was a long process. It wasn't necessarily difficult per se. It was fun. Despite my limitations with nuances and connotative meaning, I'm a language person. I love language. I love thinking about how words and sentences are put together. So in high school, one of my friends that I made in high school knew some Japanese. He started getting me into Japanese musicians and giving me translations of the Japanese songs. At the time, I obviously didn't know. One of those musicians, a band called Kagra, the author or the main vocalist Ishii was also an author. He wrote all the lyrics, he put out a lot of stories. The few translations that I could find, I absolutely loved. About 90% of his work was never translated. So I thought, I love this stuff so much. I'm starting to learn Japanese with this friend's help. I should take a crack at translating this. So I learned a lot through trial and error. My old translations, very, very poor by my current standards. The spirit was there. The heart is definitely there, but I could do a lot better if I were to redo it these days. I probably won't. It's a lot of work, but I still have a lot of fondness for them. Later in university, I did take Japanese courses as well. I was pretty well ahead of the curriculum by then because I've been self-tutoring for 10 years prior. I spent a long time in university, but yeah, I mostly had a process of teaching myself based on media that I wanted to consume, be it translations of that musician's works or games I wanted to play. There was just a need that I had to fill.
Well, speaking of self-tutoring, I do have a 184-day streak going on Duolingo in Japanese. So, Sparrow, I can order green tea and sushi like a boss now. But moving on, we heard that you are working on giving Dragon Warrior 4, one of my favorites, the same delocalized treatment. How far along are you with that project?
So the project isn't necessarily off the ground. Jeff mentioned it to me a while back that some people were working on it. So I decided, I haven't played this in a while. I've been thinking about it. It's a very, very impressive NES game, and I kind of wanted to revisit it. Then he mentioned this project, and I was like, okay, this is the next game I'm going to play. I'm going to play in Japanese. I'm going to open up a PDF of the English script while I play, and any change that I see that is what I would consider either censorship or a mistranslation, I'm going to create a Google Doc and I'm going to write it all out. We haven't actually done any editing in the ROM yet, and honestly, going back to the romhacking.net discussion, I don't know how or if we will be able to get to that point without more support. Jeff could probably speak more on that, but yeah, I've been doing the Google Doc thing. I've retranslated not the whole game. I didn't touch every line. It is a pretty good translation for the most part, but the Google Doc was about 60 pages by the time I was finished because there's a lot of text in that game.
So I have to ask about one specific line that I love in the original. In Alina's chapter, they say, "Don't litter the litter. Oh, now is not the time for puns." Was that a pun in the original too?
It actually was. I was pleased to see that they handled it that well. A lot of the old translations didn't get the humor across very well, but this was actually a very cheesy pun in Japanese. The "Don't litter the litter" translation was also censorship, though, by Nintendo of America. And obviously part of delocalizing the games is also getting rid of censorship. So even though I'm pleased to see that they handled it well within their limits, I kind of took a different take on it. In Japanese, the joke involves the word gokago, which is a homonym for A, divine protection, and B, palanquin or litter. So in this situation in the game, I'm sure you're aware, but I'll explain it for everybody's sake. Alina is being sent off in this litter or palanquin to be sacrificed to a monster who's going to eat her, but the intention is she's going to fight it. Obviously, she wins. That's not a concern. But in my Google Doc, I translated that line as "I'll pray for the prey." So we're getting the religious reference in there in terms of praying. And obviously in this situation, the prey would be Alina.
I love that.
So it's not literal, but it's kind of taking the same angle without the censorship.
Oh, I love that. That's a great change.
Thank you. I was pretty happy that I came up with that. Jeffrey hasn't even read through this Google Doc, so I don't know if it will stay as it is. We always talk about these lines. But when we actually get to working on the ROM, I'm probably going to fight for this line a little bit.
You call me in. I'll help you fight for that one. I'm all for that one.
Awesome.
That's a pretty good one. I'll probably maybe I'll pretend to have an issue just so I can win with something else. I don't know, but Anyway, yeah, Dragon Quest IV Delocalized. We started work on that years ago, right after 3, and I did about 70% of the graphics uncensoring, and there were some snags that I hit. Like I've never had to edit the graphics of a monster in any of these games, and Dragon Quest IV is the first game that has you fight a bunny girl, and they censored the bunny girl, and this is when Elena is in her tournament in Endor. Yeah, so they took the bunny ears off the monster sprite, and the monster sprites are all compressed in the game. You can't just edit them like you can edit the moving character sprites. So I would have had to figure out what the compression scheme is and how to spin out the tile work for the monsters, and it just made my head spin, and I didn't have the support, so I kind of quit. And lately people started doing work on Dragon Quest IV and started chiming in on our project thread on ROM hacking. So somebody did all of the sprite work and all of the graphical decensoring work that I did and that I didn't do. That was pretty impressive. And then somebody else did a title screen pretty much exactly in the style of what we did for the first 3 games. And I was like, darn, if other people are hyped enough about our project that they're willing to do the work for us, we should really get off our butts and try to get involved at this point. So that was sort of the conversation that got Sparrow energized about examining the translation and doing all the initial analysis. And I reached out to that guy at ABW. Hey, what's going on? Are you around if I need some help? And he's like, yeah, tiny little bits of time. I might be able to answer a question once in a blue. And he's taken 2 weeks to respond to me. So I'm not really sure how much is there support wise, but he did send me a little bit of initial work he did for for script insertion. The script is compressed. I think he did some work to uncompress it, and but he said it's unfinished, and I need to really kind of work through that. One of my big problems is I got really into this hiking hobby, and I just do bigger and bigger and bigger hikes. I'm doing these 30-mile hikes now that make me mentally and physically exhausted for 5-6 days afterwards, and I'm doing them every week, every other week. So I was telling Sparrow, I think the only way that I'm going to really get this project off the ground is the next time I get injured, because when I get injured I don't know what to do with myself. I have all this pent up energy, and that's the perfect time to start doing the technical work on Dragon Quest IV. So we'll see what the future holds.
So we're rooting for an injury in order to get Dragon Quest IV delocalized. That's what we're saying.
Just a matter of time.
All right.
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
I've been to your place before, but maybe next time I go there, I might have to bring a crowbar or something. I don't know. Dragon Quest IV is my favorite, so I can't make any promises.
He's so addicted to hiking, he's recording this podcast from the woods right now. And with that, we wrap up this episode of Slime Time. Big thanks to Jeff and Sparrow for coming on to talk to us about their projects.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It was my first time on a podcast, and I had a great time talking about all of this and having a laugh with you guys. It was fun.
I really appreciate the time as well to kind of talk about the past and hopefully, talk about the future as well.
Thank you so much. It's been fun playing the projects that you've done in the past. They're so fun to play. So we're a nonprofit podcast. We won't censor your hard-earned gold when we can offer you quality content for free. But if you do have some extra gold that's just completely burning a hole in your wallet, pouch, bottomless bag, hacked ROM, or treasure chest, and you would like to donate anything to a website that's been supporting Dragon Quest fans for over 25 years, stop by the Dragon's Den by clicking the link in the show notes. There are several ways to support the Den, including the affiliate links that don't cost you anything extra when making other Dragon Quest purchases.
We even have a Slime Time t-shirt that was designed by our resident artist, Dwayne. See the link for it in our show notes.
You can direct comments or questions for the podcast on X and Instagram at DQ Slimetime.
Check out my Instagram page, Dragon Quest Feels.
And you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/EastXTwitch. Come watch me play a variety of games every Saturday, kids.
Join in tons of Dragon Quest discussion at the Dragon's Den forums and Discord and the Dragon Questers and Slime Time Facebook groups.
We'd like to thank everyone that made this podcast possible, including Pendy, Jen today, Woodis, the Dragon's Den, and everyone who takes the time to make cool ROM hacks for other gamers to enjoy.
And special thanks to Paul. Please subscribe, and write a review for the podcast.
We'll catch you later, everybody. Don't hate, appreciate.
Dragon Quest Slime Time, sliming off.
This is Gertrude for Slime Time, reminding you all that you must complete your adventure.